My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 now, a software engineer living in Austin, Texas. But before I tell you about the wedding my parents refused to attend, I need to take you back to when I first learned what it meant to live in someone else's shadow. If you're listening, please support the channel, hit subscribe, drop a like, and share this story. It helps me keep telling the truth about family, favoritism, and finding your own voice. I was 10 years old, and Dallas was boiling in its usual late spring heat. The air shimmered above the driveways, cicadas screeched from the oak trees, and I held a trophy so shiny it reflected the sun right into my eyes. I'd just won first place in the district math competition. My teacher had hugged me at the award ceremony, whispering that she'd never seen a kid solve equations that fast. My chest still carried that warmth when I pushed open our front door. The house smelled of buttercream frosting. My mother, Karen, was in the kitchen, bent over a cake covered with thick white icing. She wasn't alone. My father, Richard, was stringing up paper decorations. The banner across the wall read, "Congratulations, Emily." I froze in the doorway. Emily, my younger sister. She was 8. "Mom?" I held the trophy high, the way I imagined winners on TV did. "I got first place. Out of everyone." She glanced over her shoulder, lips pinched in concentration. "Careful, Sarah. Don't scuff the floor with those shoes. Emily's choir director is stopping by any minute." My heart did a funny little drop, but I tried again. "No, Mom, look, it's a district trophy. It's heavy." "Good job, honey," Dad muttered, more to the streamers than to me. Then he pointed at the clock. "We've got 15 minutes before guests arrive. Karen, did you ice the sides yet?" That was it. No smile, no hug. Just good job, the kind you give when your kid hands you a dandelion weed from the yard. I swallowed, pressing the metal against my chest. The cool surface burned my skin in a way that only made sense to a 10-year-old who desperately wanted to be seen. The front door banged open, and Emily breezed in. Curls bouncing, cheeks flushed, she smelled like strawberry lip gloss. "Is the cake ready?" Ms. Henderson said I should practice looking at the third row when I sing, so my eyes connect with the audience. Do I look like I'm connecting? She widened her gaze dramatically. "You look perfect," Mom said instantly. "Try on the dress before guests come." She lifted a garment bag from North Park Center, silk shimmering under the light. "We had it altered just for you. The whole church will be stunned." "Wow!" Emily squealed. She tossed her backpack onto the sofa, right on top of my math worksheets, and ran upstairs. The trophy felt heavier. My stomach twisted so tight it hurt. Dad finally noticed it dangling from my hands. He raised his eyebrows, then reached for a bag of balloons. "That's nice, Sarah. Go put it on the shelf in your room before it gets knocked over." The shelf in my room. Not the mantel, not the living room wall where Emily's framed headshot hung, spotlighted by its own little lamp. My award was too fragile for the family to see. When the guests arrived, choir moms, church friends, even our dentist, Mom ushered everyone toward Emily, who spun in her new dress like a star in orbit. I stood with my plate of cookies, the trophy now hidden upstairs, listening to strangers praise her voice, her beauty, her potential. At one point, Ms. Henderson glanced at me and asked politely, "Sarah, are you in choir too?" I shook my head, but before I could explain, Mom laughed lightly. "Oh, Sarah's more behind the scenes, numbers, computers, not stage material." The words landed sharper than any slap. I wanted to protest. I like math, I'm proud of it, but the heat in my cheeks locked my mouth shut. My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the cookie tray. That was the moment I realized. My parents didn't just prefer Emily. They had written a whole script for our lives. Emily, the star. Sarah, the shadow. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the kitchen smelled of melted wax and paper plates, I helped Mom scrape frosting off the counter. She carved neat slices from the cake, carefully handing Emily the piece with the E from her name. I got the corner, where the icing had run. "Don't eat too much," she added absently. "The camera adds weight. We don't want to fight bad habits early." Her tone was casual, but my stomach clenched like a fist. I forced a smile, cheeks burning, and nodded. Inside, shame coiled deep, a snake I wouldn't recognize until years later. Upstairs, Emily sprawled across her bed, phone cord stretched as she giggled with a friend. The silk dress hung nearby, glowing in the lamplight. I lingered in the hallway, wanting to say, "You looked pretty. Congrats." But the words stuck. Compliments felt like surrendering more territory in a war I hadn't agreed to fight. So I turned to my room. I set the trophy on the lowest shelf, behind a stack of old library books, hidden even from myself. Then I opened my journal and wrote in shaky pencil, "Maybe if I join choir, they'll notice me too." I stared at the sentence until my eyes blurred. Then I scribbled it out, but the indent stayed, pressed into the paper like a scar. That night, lying in bed, I replayed everything. The way Mom's arms wrapped around Emily, the way Dad puffed his chest when neighbors complimented his younger daughter. My own victory, a trophy that proved I was smart, capable, worth celebrating, had been reduced to an afterthought in my own home. And for the first time, I whispered a question into the dark. What if I'll never be enough, no matter what I do? The silence answered me. That's how my story really begins. Not at my wedding, not with my parents' empty chairs, but right here in Dallas, with a trophy gathering dust and a little girl learning she would always be second place in her own family. If that night with the trophy taught me I was invisible, my teenage years carved the lesson deeper. By the time I was 16, I had grown taller, a little rounder than the cheerleader types at Lakewood High, and I carried the kind of awkward self-consciousness that sticks to you like summer sweat in Dallas. But I also carried a secret pride. I had kept my grades at the top of my class, juggling math team, science fairs, and coding competitions. Numbers gave me clarity when people didn't. The summer of my junior year, my high school planned a small banquet for students who had earned academic honors. I'd been looking forward to it for months. It was supposed to be my night, the one where I wouldn't have to fight for a spotlight, but my family had other plans. The day of the banquet, I came home in my cap and gown. My heart was buzzing with the thought of Dad snapping pictures, Mom asking me to pose. I opened the door to silence. No smell of dinner cooking, no balloons, nothing. I walked through the living room, my heels clicking against the wood floor. Then I noticed. Mom's purse was gone from the entryway, Dad's keys weren't on the hook, and there, taped to the fridge, was a note scribbled in my mom's neat handwriting. "Sarah, Emily has a casting call in Houston today, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We couldn't say no. There are leftovers in the fridge, we'll make it up to you." Make it up to me. The words blurred as my throat tightened. I leaned against the counter, staring at the note like it might rearrange itself if I glared hard enough. That night, instead of a celebration, I drove myself to the banquet. I sat at a round table with other kids, their families beaming, clapping, snapping photos. When my name was called, I walked on stage alone. No one cheered my name. I forced a smile for the yearbook photographer, but inside I wanted to disappear. Afterward, while parents hugged their kids, I slipped out into the humid night, holding my certificate tight enough to wrinkle the paper. When I got home close to midnight, the house was dark except for the kitchen light. Emily's laughter floated from the living room. She was sprawled on the couch, still in her audition dress, talking excitedly into the phone. Mom and Dad sat nearby, nodding proudly at every word. "Houston was amazing," she gushed. "The photographer said I had the look. He even hinted about a campaign next year." "That's our girl," Dad said, puffing out his chest. "Always knew you were destined for bigger things." I stood at the doorway, the certificate shaking in my hand. Mom looked up, finally noticing me. "Oh, you're back. How was your dinner thing?" "Banquet," I corrected softly. "Yes, that," she said, waving it off. "Sorry we couldn't make it. You know how important Emily's opportunity was? Did you eat something?" My chest tightened so hard it hurt. "Yeah," I lied. I didn't want to admit I had sat alone, picking at dry chicken while everyone else's parents toasted. Emily finally hung up the phone. She looked me over, her eyes flicking to the rolled-up certificate. "What's that?" Honor roll, I murmured. Cute, she said with a smirk, the same word she had used years earlier. Anyway, the photographer said I could model in New York someday. Can you imagine? Dad's eyes lit up. We'll start saving for trips. Karen, we should look into headshots. They dove into planning mode while I walked quietly to my room, certificate still in my hand. I slid it into a drawer, shut it with a click, and sat on my bed staring at the ceiling fan turning overhead. The house echoed with Emily's laughter. My ears rang with silence. But favoritism didn't just steal nights like that banquet. It crept into daily life. Mom scrutinized everything I wore. Sarah, black is slimming. Maybe stick with that. Or, if you'd just put in effort like Emily, you'd be so pretty. Dad compared without even realizing. Emily's got such natural charisma. You're more book smart. Nothing wrong with that. Each word chipped at me until I wasn't sure if I was being built or dismantled. One weekend I tried to push back. Emily had just been crowned homecoming queen. The house erupted in celebration. Mom hanging photos, Dad calling relatives. I cornered Mom in the kitchen. Why don't you ever celebrate me like that? I blurted. My voice shook, but I kept going. When I won the science fair, you barely mentioned it. Emily wins a tiara, and suddenly we're throwing parties. Mom froze, her hand still holding the photo frame. Her eyes narrowed like I'd crossed some invisible line. Sarah, don't be dramatic. We treat you both the same. No, you don't, I whispered. Dad overheard, walking in with a soda. This jealousy isn't healthy, Sarah. You should be happy for your sister. Stop trying to compete. The words slammed into me like a door. Compete? I wasn't competing. I was begging to be seen. Emily strutted in then, tiara still perched on her hair. She caught the tail end of the conversation and smirked. It's not my fault people notice me, Sarah. Maybe if you smiled more. Her words hung in the air, smug and polished, like a dagger disguised as advice. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand justice. But instead I felt that same old tightening in my stomach, the one that made me curl in on myself. I grabbed my backpack, muttered, I'm going to the library, and left. At the Dallas Public Library, I sat under the fluorescent lights, pretending to study calculus. But really, I stared at the equations until they blurred, tears dropping onto the paper. Numbers were steady. They followed rules. Unlike people, they didn't change the answer just because they liked someone better. I told myself that night, fine. If they want Emily to shine, let her. I'll shine somewhere else. It wasn't resolve yet, just survival. But it was the first seed of the independence I would later grow into. Looking back, those teenage years taught me a cruel truth. It wasn't just that my parents overlooked me. It was that they rewrote reality to fit their narrative. They gaslit me before I even knew what the word meant, denying favoritism, insisting I was jealous, painting me as ungrateful whenever I tried to speak up, so I stopped speaking. And in that silence, I started building a life apart from theirs. I didn't know it then, but the girl sitting alone at the library desk was already setting the foundation for the woman who, years later, would refuse to let their absence define her wedding day. By the time I turned 25, Austin had become more than a city to me. It was a chance to build a life beyond my parents' reach. I had a steady job at a mid-sized tech company, a small but comfortable apartment near the Domain, and a rhythm that made sense. Morning coffee, lines of code, long walks by Ladybird Lake on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And yet, even 3 hours down I-35 from Dallas, Emily's shadow stretched long enough to reach me. The first time I shipped a major feature at work, I sent a photo to the family group chat, me and my team smiling in front of a whiteboard covered in diagrams, taco boxes open on the desk behind us. Me. We did it. I led the back-end design and it's live today. For 10 minutes, the chat stayed silent. Then Mom replied, Mom, so proud of you, honey. By the way, Emily just landed her first national campaign. Look at this photo. Seconds later, a glossy magazine scan filled the screen. Emily, draped in silk, her name printed in bold letters across the corner. Heart emojis flooded in from relatives, fireworks gifs, comments about how stunning she looked. My message scrolled quietly out of sight. I put my phone face down and forced a smile when my manager clapped me on the back. But inside, the same old ache returned, sharp as ever. No matter how far I ran, my wins were just filler between Emily's headlines. At work, people noticed the imbalance before I did. One evening, as I walked out with my teammate Maya, she asked, "Is it just me, or does your family always respond to your news by pivoting to your sister?" I laughed it off. "They don't mean anything by it." Maya tilted her head. "Maybe not, but you deserve people who celebrate you, not the timing of your sister's career moves." Her words stuck with me, echoing louder each time it happened again. That fall, I presented a project at a regional tech conference in downtown Austin. I had spent months preparing a demo on memory leak detection tools, and when I stepped onto that stage under the fluorescent lights, my hands shook, but my voice was steady. The demo landed perfectly. People lined up afterward to ask questions, and my manager beamed like I had just put our company on the map. During the break, I stepped into the hallway and dialed my parents. "Hey," I said, still buzzing. "I just finished my first conference talk. It went amazing. People actually—" Mom cut me off. "That's great, Sarah, but we're driving Emily to DFW. She's flying to New York for a runway show. Can we call you later?" The call ended with muffled background noise, Emily laughing, Dad asking if they'd packed her passport. I stood in that hallway, phone limp in my hand, applause still ringing faintly from the ballroom behind me. The victory tasted hollow. Emily's career in New York exploded after that. She posted pictures of skyline views, cappuccinos in Soho, and captions about the hustle. My parents shared every single one in the family group chat like they were breaking news. Sometimes she called me directly, usually when she wanted something. "Hey," she said once, her voice echoing through traffic sounds. "Can you make me a website? Nothing fancy, just clean and fast. It'll be great exposure for you if I tag you." "I'm in the middle of a sprint cycle," I told her. "I don't have the time." She sighed. "You always make things difficult." "Forget it, I'll figure it out." A week later, she launched her site with the caption, "Built it all myself. Women in tech." My mother forwarded the post to every relative. I closed Instagram, heart pounding, wondering how much longer I could keep absorbing these small betrayals. When my promotion to senior engineer came through, my boss, Luis, took the team out for coffee. He raised his cup like a toast. "To Sarah, whose code not only works, but teaches the rest of us how to write cleaner." I laughed with everyone, cheeks warm. But when I texted my family later, the reply was predictable. "Me. Got promoted today. Dinner's on me next time I'm in Dallas. Mom. So proud of both my girls. Did you see Emily's cover shoot? She's radiant." Another picture, another wave of applause for her. My message sat above it like an afterthought. That night, over dinner, Daniel caught me staring at my phone. "They ignored you again, didn't they?" he asked. I shrugged. "I should be used to it." "Doesn't mean you deserve it," he said. Daniel entered my life almost by accident. We met at a South by Southwest networking event, a chaotic mix of techies, entrepreneurs, and artists. I had just finished giving a lightning talk on race conditions, palms still sweaty, when he came up afterward. "Your explanation made more sense than anything I learned in grad school," he said. He introduced himself as an architect. "Real buildings," he clarified with a grin. "But I dabble in code. Mostly so I can understand conversations like this." We ended up walking to a cafe on Congress Avenue. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was listening without comparing me to anyone else. He didn't flinch when I admitted my parents rarely celebrated my achievements. He just looked at me and said, "Then maybe you need people who do." Something in me cracked open. But even with Daniel by my side, the shadow never fully left. My parents continued to orbit Emily, their pride loud and public, while my own milestones were met with polite nods or redirected applause. One evening, as Daniel and I sat on our porch in Austin, I told him what haunted me most. "I feel like no matter how much I achieve, I'll always be the footnote to Emily's story. Like my life is just filler between her chapters." He leaned back, eyes fixed on the Texas sky. Then stop writing yourself as a footnote. Write your own book. Let her keep the spotlight. Light bulbs burn out, but the foundation you're building, that lasts. His words stayed with me. Maybe the shadow wasn't mine to carry anymore. Maybe it was time to build a life so solid, no spotlight, or lack of it, could shake it. Years passed in Austin, steady as the hum of cicadas in summer. What began as late-night coffee runs and long walks by the river with Daniel turned into a life we quietly built together. Shared rent, shared routines, shared dreams. 4 years slipped by, not in a blur, but in the comfort of a rhythm that felt like home. And it was in that ordinary, safe rhythm that something extraordinary finally happened. Daniel asked me to marry him. By the time Daniel and I had been dating 4 years, Austin had settled into the rhythm of our life together. Bike rides along Lady Bird Lake, late-night tacos at Torchy's, weekends spent sprawled on the couch while cicadas buzzed through open windows. I had never imagined myself the type who longed for a proposal, but with him it wasn't about diamonds or grand gestures. It was about permanence, the quiet kind of certainty I'd been denied in my own childhood home. It happened on a Tuesday night, the least glamorous of nights. I came home from work, drained, laptop bag biting into my shoulder, and found Daniel in the kitchen with takeout spread across the counter, Thai curry, the good kind with basil and spice that sticks to your lips. "Rough day?" he asked, kissing the top of my head as I kicked off my flats. "Code review," I sighed. "One guy on the team thinks tabs are the hill to die on. I swear, formatting wars will outlive us all." Daniel chuckled, handing me chopsticks. "Eat. Then I have something for you." We curled onto the couch, Netflix humming in the background, cartons open between us. Somewhere between my second bite of curry and his last swig of ginger beer, he shifted, reaching into his hoodie pocket. "I was going to do this in some elaborate way," he admitted, pulling out a small velvet box. "But honestly, that's never been us." My heart lurched. He opened it. A simple gold band, a modest diamond that caught the lamplight and scattered it across the room. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, steady and warm, "will you marry me?" I forgot to breathe for a second. All the years of being invisible in my family, all the times I was told I wasn't enough. His words cut through it like sunlight in a locked room. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder, "Yes." He slipped the ring on my finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for me all along. We laughed, kissed, spilled curry on the couch cushion, and laughed again. It wasn't a grand moment. It was ours. The next morning, nerves buzzing, I dialed my parents. I wanted them to hear it from me before anyone else. Mom picked up. "Hello? Hi, Mom. I have news." My voice wavered, but I pushed through. "Daniel proposed last night. I'm engaged." Silence. A long one, like static on the line. Finally, she said, "Engaged? Already? Sarah, are you sure you want to jump into that?" The joy in my chest faltered. "We've been together 4 years. Of course I'm sure." She exhaled sharply. "Marriage is a big step. You've always been so impulsive." Impulsive, as if 4 years were a rash decision. I heard Dad in the background. "What's going on?" "Your daughter thinks she's ready to get married," Mom told him, her voice flat. Dad got on the line. "Congratulations, I guess. Is Daniel financially stable? Marriage requires responsibility." "He's an architect," I said firmly. "He's more than stable, and I have my own career." "Of course," Dad muttered, like he hadn't meant to dismiss it out loud. Then Mom added, almost casually, "Maybe you should consider getting in better shape before the wedding. Photos last forever, you know." The words sliced through me. My throat tightened. Old reflex, the sting of 1,000 comments about my body, all the diets I never asked for, the exercise classes I was forced into as a teenager. My stomach knotted until I could hardly speak. "Did you hear what I said?" I asked quietly. "I'm engaged. I want you to be happy for me." "We are," Mom said quickly, tone brittle, defensive. "Of course we are. It's just..." Not how we expected things to go. Not how they expected. I hung up soon after, promising we'd talk more later. But when I set my phone down, my hands were shaking. Daniel noticed that night as we sat on the porch, the Austin skyline glowing faintly beyond the trees. "They weren't excited, were they?" he asked gently. I tried to smile, but it wobbled. "Mom asked if I was sure. Dad wanted to know if you make enough money. And she told me to lose weight before the wedding." His jaw clenched. Unbelievable. "It's not new," I said softly. "It's just louder when it's supposed to be a happy moment." Daniel took my hand, thumb brushing over the new ring. "Sarah, I don't care if your parents ever cheer for us. I care that you know I see you, exactly as you are. That's why I asked." Tears blurred my vision. "I believe you. It's just, I wanted them to be proud, just once." He squeezed my hand tighter. "Then we'll build our own pride, our own family. Their approval isn't the air you breathe." I leaned against his shoulder, listening to the crickets rise into chorus. For the first time since saying yes, I felt the weight of old wounds pressing in, colliding with the joy of a future I desperately wanted. When we told friends, they screamed and hugged us, opened bottles of wine, flooded my phone with heart emojis. My coworkers decorated my desk with sticky notes shaped like rings. The world outside my family celebrated loudly. But at night, when the house was quiet, I kept replaying my mother's voice. "Are you sure? Maybe lose some weight first." The ring on my finger glimmered under the lamp, solid and certain. And I told myself again and again that Daniel's love was real, that our life together would be built on something stronger than approval that never came. Still, I couldn't shake the chill of their reaction. If they couldn't celebrate the beginning of my marriage, what would they do when the wedding actually came? That question, heavy and unanswered, lingered like a storm cloud over the joy. If the proposal had been simple and perfect, the wedding was supposed to be the day it all came together, a public affirmation of the life Daniel and I were building. But as the morning sun slid across the limestone hills of Austin, I already carried a knot in my stomach, one I couldn't untangle no matter how many times I reminded myself this day was about love, not absence. We chose a garden venue just outside Barton Creek, the kind of place where oak trees stretch wide enough to shelter rows of white chairs, where wildflowers scatter color across the grass. The air smelled of fresh-cut stems and faint cedar. My mother-in-law, Janet Carter, hovered near me that morning, pinning the last touches to my bouquet. "You look beautiful, Sarah," she said, her voice certain, like she meant every syllable. "Daniel's going to cry when he sees you." I smiled, but behind the veil of makeup and nerves, my chest throbbed with something heavier. Because while the Carters had spent the week ironing linens, arranging flowers, and making sure no details slipped, my own parents still hadn't RSVP'd. No phone call that morning, no text. Just silence. Janet squeezed my hands as if she could read the swirl in my head. "Let today be about the people who are here. You deserve that." I nodded, whispering thank you, even as a part of me clung to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me and walk down the aisle at the last minute. The ceremony began. The string quartet eased into the first notes of canon in D. Guests rose, a blur of pastel dresses and suits, the Texas sun glinting off sunglasses. My arm looped through Daniel's father's for the walk down the aisle, because my own father hadn't even replied when I asked if he'd give me away. And then I saw them, 2 white chairs in the front row, dressed with ribbons like all the others, glaringly empty. The sight cut sharper than I expected. Not just empty chairs. Proof. Proof that my parents could miss the most important day of my life and sleep at night. Proof that Emily's imaginary future wedding meant more to them than the real one unfolding right here. I stumbled slightly, and Mr. Carter steadied me. "Easy," he whispered. "Daniel's waiting." So I looked up. And there he was. Daniel, eyes shining, mouth trembling at the edges, hands clasped so tight I could see the whiteness of his knuckles. In that moment, his face was the anchor. The emptiness in the front row was the storm. The vows passed like waves, Daniel's voice steady, mine breaking once but finding strength again when he mouthed, "I've got you." Rings slid onto fingers. Guests dabbed at their eyes. Applause rippled. And yet, in every pause, my gaze betrayed me. It drifted back to those chairs. I imagined Mom's polite half-smile, Dad's stiff posture, Emily whispering some critique under her breath. For years I had longed for their applause, their approval. On the day I should have been free of it, I still searched for what wasn't there. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, joy roared around me. People stood, clapping. Daniel kissed me, the kind of kiss that promises permanence. Cameras flashed, but out of the corner of my eye, still the void of 2 white seats. The reception began under twinkling lights strung through oak branches. The Carters moved like a practiced team, Janet handing out champagne, Daniel's sister cueing the playlist, his cousins keeping kids laughing. Warmth wrapped around me in a way I had never known in my own family gatherings. At one point, Daniel's aunt pulled me into a hug. "We're so lucky to have you, Sarah." Her words should have been enough, and yet, when the DJ announced the father-daughter dance, my breath caught. The dance floor cleared. I stood alone in the center, dress heavy around my legs, hands dangling uncertain. Then Janet walked up, eyes brimming. "If you'll let me," she whispered. My throat closed. I nodded. She took my hands, and the music began. Soft, steady, a melody meant for fathers but filled now with motherly grace. She swayed with me, murmuring, "You're loved. Don't ever doubt it." Tears streaked my face. Guests cheered. From the outside, it looked touching, maybe even poetic. But inside, grief and gratitude clashed like lightning. Every spin reminded me of what I didn't have. Every cheer reminded me of what I did. Later, as Daniel and I cut the cake, laughter filled the air. He leaned close, icing on his cheek, and whispered, "Forget the empty chairs. Look around. This is a family." I followed his gaze. Friends clinking glasses, co-workers from Austin shouting toasts, cousins on his side chasing sparklers. Every face beamed at us. For a moment, I let myself believe him. But when the crowd thinned and music softened, I slipped outside alone. The Texas night pressed warm against my skin, cicadas buzzing like static. From where I stood, I could see those 2 chairs still by the aisle, now abandoned under starlight. I walked up to them, sat down in one, ran my fingers along the ribbon, and whispered to the night, "Why wasn't I enough?" No answer. Just the hum of insects, the faint echo of laughter from the reception. Then Daniel's shadow stretched across the grass. He crouched beside me, hand covering mine. "They're not here," he said gently. "But I am, always." I looked at him, eyes blurred, heart raw, and for the first time all day, I let go of the question. Maybe it would haunt me again tomorrow. But in that moment, under oak branches and Texas stars, I chose to believe him. That night ended with sparklers, kisses, laughter, outwardly perfect. But the memory etched itself differently inside me. Not just the joy of becoming a wife, but the searing knowledge that my parents' absence was deliberate and permanent in a way I had never let myself admit before. 2 empty chairs. That was my inheritance from them. And yet, Daniel's hand in mine, Janet's arms around me, the cheers of people who chose to show up, that was my future. The wedding was over. The sparklers had burned down to ash, and Daniel and I returned to our apartment in North Austin with half a freezer of leftover cake and a silence neither of us wanted to break. I had hoped the ceremony itself might soften the ache, that laughter and dancing would erase the image of those 2 glaringly empty chairs. It didn't. 2 weeks later, the silence from Dallas was unbearable. No call, no apology, not even a congratulations, just the void. One night, with the city humming outside my window and Daniel asleep in the next room, I picked up the phone and dialed home. My hands shook as if I were 16 again, bracing for criticism over a prom dress that never fit. Mom answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" Her voice was too cheerful, brittle like glass. "It's me," I said. My throat tightened. "We need to talk." A pause, then, "We were wondering when you'd finally call. Richard, pick up the other line. It's Sarah." The click of a second receiver. My father's measured tone. "So, you decided to reach out?" I swallowed. "I wanted to understand why you didn't come. Why you missed my wedding." Silence. Then Mom exhaled sharply. "We didn't receive an invitation, Sarah. Not a real one. If you wanted us there, you should have made sure." I gripped the phone until my knuckles went white. "That's not true. I sent paper invitations to your Dallas address, and the e-invites showed red receipts. I have proof." Dad's voice hardened. "Proof? Don't talk to us like lawyers in a courtroom. We don't appreciate being accused of lying." "I'm not accusing," I said, though my voice shook. "I'm telling you I did everything right. You chose not to come." Mom gasped, sharp and offended. "How dare you say that? Do you know how hurtful it is to be excluded from your own daughter's wedding? All our friends asked where we were. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" My chest constricted. "Embarrassing for you? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me to stand there and see those empty chairs?" "Don't twist this," Dad snapped. "You've always been dramatic. Maybe you didn't really want us there. Maybe this is your way of punishing us." Punishing? The word rattled through me like thunder. For a moment, I almost doubted myself, almost believed I was the villain they painted me as. I closed my eyes, took a breath. "I begged for you to RSVP. I called, I texted, I emailed. You ignored me. That isn't punishment, it's abandonment." Mom's voice softened suddenly, syrupy but poisonous. "Sarah, sweetie, you sound unstable. You're letting emotions cloud your memory. We never saw those invitations. Maybe you imagined sending them." Gaslighting, live on the line. Heat surged through me. "I checked the tracking. USPS confirmed delivery. Don't you dare tell me I imagined it." There was a sharp intake of breath. Then Dad, "Enough. We will not be attacked in our own home." Attacked? The irony nearly made me laugh, if it hadn't made me want to cry. "Attacked?" I whispered. "All I ever wanted was for you to be there. That's it. Not flowers, not money, not speeches, just your presence. And you couldn't give me that." Mom's voice turned cold. "We never imagined you'd stoop so low as to smear us to the family. Your cousins have been asking questions. Are you spreading stories to make us look bad?" I froze. So they already knew. Whispers must have started circulating, guests asking why my parents weren't at the wedding, me giving the only honest answer. They chose not to come. "I told the truth," I said simply. "You mean your version of the truth?" Dad retorted. "You've always been jealous of Emily, and now you're trying to ruin her future by dragging our family name through the mud." The mention of Emily twisted the knife. My sister, the sun they orbited, the standard I could never reach. Of course this would come back to her. I steadied my voice. "This isn't about Emily. This is about you and me. You abandoned me on the most important day of my life." "You're twisting everything," Mom hissed. "We raised you better than this. Playing the victim doesn't suit you." My pulse thundered in my ears. For years I would have folded here, apologized, backtracked, tried to mend what they shattered, but something in me snapped. Maybe it was the memory of Daniel's hand steadying mine at the altar, or Janet stepping into the father-daughter dance. Maybe it was the sight of those chairs burned into me like scars. I straightened. "You know what? You're right. I am done playing the victim. I can't control how you spin things to protect Emily or your perfect family image. But I can control this. I won't let you gaslight me anymore. I know what happened, and so does everyone who was there." The line went quiet. Then Dad's voice, cool and deliberate. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending. If you've already decided we're terrible parents, then there's nothing left to discuss." Mom's final blow came quick, sharp. "You've poisoned yourself against us, Sarah. And when Emily walks down the aisle, you'll see what a real wedding looks like. We won't let you ruin hers, too." Something inside me broke cleanly, like glass under pressure. For once, the break felt like release. "I don't want to ruin her wedding," I said softly. "I just wanted my parents at mine." And then I hung up. The phone sat heavy in my lap. My hands trembled, but for the first time, the tears that came weren't frantic, begging tears. They were quiet, cleansing. Daniel appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. "You okay?" I wiped my face and managed a small smile. "No, but maybe better than I've ever been." He walked over, pulled me into his chest, and whispered, "They'll never change, but you don't need them to." And for the first time, I believed him. The phone confrontation with my parents had left me raw but strangely lighter, as if saying the words aloud had cracked open a window in a house that had been locked for years. For a few days afterward, I let myself breathe. Daniel and I cooked dinner together, went for late walks through Zilker Park, and even laughed about the wedding photos where his uncle blinked in every single frame. But the calm didn't last. In my family, it never did. It started with a text. "Emily, we need to talk. What you said to Mom and Dad was completely inappropriate." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, heart pounding. It had only been 4 days since I'd hung up on my parents. I hadn't spoken to Emily at all since the wedding. My pulse spiked, but I typed anyway. Me. "Emily, this isn't between you and me. It's about Mom and Dad not showing up." Her reply was instant, like she'd been waiting. "Emily, everything in this family involves me. You've always been insecure, but dragging our parents' names through the mud because you're jealous of my wedding? That's beyond petty." I dropped the phone onto the couch like it had burned me. Daniel, seated at the dining table with his laptop, looked up. "Who is it?" I rubbed my temples. "Emily." He sighed. "Of course." I didn't answer her. I thought silence would be protection, but silence to Emily was an invitation. The next morning, while I was debugging code on a stubborn API call, Daniel's phone buzzed across the desk. He frowned, then handed it to me. "Guess who?" It was a string of texts from an unknown Dallas number, though the tone was unmistakable. "Emily. Daniel, as Sarah's husband, you have a responsibility. Family dynamics are complicated. She's sensitive, and she doesn't always see the bigger picture. It's your job to help her behave more appropriately." I could practically hear her condescending tone, the same one she'd used on me since childhood, just polished now with corporate buzzwords. Daniel scrolled. "There's more. Emily, supporting me and Mom and Dad will ultimately benefit you too. Having successful family connections never hurts. But Sarah's behavior is burning bridges. She could ruin opportunities for both of you." Daniel let out a laugh so sharp it startled me. "Does she think she can bribe me with networking?" I bit my lip, torn between fury and humiliation. "That's her playbook. Undermine me, then act like she's offering something I should be grateful for." He set the phone down, jaw tight. "I'm not letting her get away with this." That evening, we sat side by side on the couch drafting a reply. Daniel wanted it short, firm, and impossible to twist. He typed, "Daniel, thank you for your concern. As Sarah's husband, my role is to support her happiness, not manage her behavior. Please direct any future concerns to her directly. Have a good evening." He showed me before pressing send. "What do you think?" My throat tightened. For years I had dreamed of someone defending me against my family's narrative, someone saying out loud that I wasn't a problem to be managed. Tears welled up before I could stop them. "It's perfect," I whispered. Daniel squeezed my hand, then hit send. Minutes later, her response came in like venom. "Emily, I see she's poisoned you too. Don't say I didn't try to help when this all blows up in your faces. No more, just that." A warning disguised as martyrdom. I leaned back against the couch, exhaustion flooding me. "She really doesn't know you at all." Daniel shook his head, amused now. "She thinks the world runs on her kind of power plays, but that only works on people who want what she's offering. And you don't. Not even a little," he said, and kissed my temple. Still, I couldn't shake the sting. Later that night, lying in bed with Daniel asleep beside me, I scrolled back through Emily's messages. Each line was a mirror of our childhood, her need to control the story, her insistence that she was the adult in the room, that I was too emotional, too small, too messy to be trusted with the truth. Back then, I had believed her, I had let her turn friends against me, twist every success into a footnote to hers. And now she was trying the same thing with my husband. But instead of breaking me, her attempt only revealed how little power she actually had. The next morning, over coffee, I told Daniel what it felt like. She used to do this with my friends. If she couldn't control me directly, she'd pull them aside, whisper things, make me look like the unstable one. Eventually, I stopped bringing people home. Daniel reached across the table, covering my hand. She's still playing the same game. The difference is I know who you are. I won't play. I studied his face, the quiet certainty in his eyes, the steadiness in his voice. It hit me then. Emily wasn't trying to protect our family or even her reputation. She was terrified of losing control. And for the first time, she had failed. That weekend, we went for a hike at Barton Creek. At the overlook, wind tangling my hair, I pulled out my phone and read her messages one last time. Then, with Daniel watching, I blocked her number. "Done," I said. He smiled. "How does it feel?" I exhaled, the weight in my chest loosening. Like I finally shut a door I should have closed years ago. The city sprawled below us, alive and indifferent. Behind me, the past clawed for attention. Ahead of me, the trail wound forward, open and waiting. And for the first time in my life, I realized Emily's power over me had never been real. It had only been the power I gave her. Now, I was done giving. Blocking Emily's number should have felt like the end, a door slammed shut. But the truth has a way of leaking out, even through cracks you don't open yourself. Within a week, whispers began drifting back to me, not from my parents, but from relatives scattered across Dallas and Houston. They wanted to know why my parents hadn't come to the wedding. At first, I tried to dodge the question. It's complicated, I'd say, but complications have limits. And after so many years of swallowing the narrative they shoved down my throat, I was tired of silence, so I told the truth. They didn't want to come, I admitted to my cousin Rachel during a phone call. I sent invitations. They read them. They just couldn't stand me getting married before Emily. Rachel went quiet. Then, "You know, that actually makes sense. Aunt Karen told my mom they never got an invitation, but it sounded fishy. I didn't believe it." Her words lit a fuse. I hadn't meant to start anything, but the truth traveled faster than I expected. It spread through the family like wildfire, group chats lighting up, cousins calling cousins, aunts whispering at church gatherings. Within days, my parents' version of events, that they'd been cruelly excluded, victims of my carelessness, was unraveling. One night, as Daniel and I were eating dinner on our porch in Austin, my phone buzzed with a message from my Aunt Denise in Houston. "Aunt Denise, your mom's been calling everyone, trying to explain. It's not convincing. People are starting to ask why they always treat Emily like gold and you like nothing. I thought you should know." I read it twice, then passed the phone to Daniel. He smirked, shaking his head. "They're panicking." I didn't feel triumph. I felt a strange mix of sadness and release, like watching a dam crack from the inside. 2 days later, I decided to stop waiting for the truth to be pieced together secondhand. I drafted an email, clear, concise, factual, family. Since some of you have asked why my parents weren't at the wedding, I want to set the record straight. Invitations were sent both electronically and by mail. I have receipts. I also reached out multiple times for confirmation. They chose not to come. That decision is theirs alone. This isn't about jealousy or Emily's future wedding. This is about a pattern that's existed my whole life. I don't ask you to take sides. I only ask you not to believe lies told at my expense. Sarah. I hovered over the send button for a long time, pulse hammering. Daniel touched my shoulder. "You're not creating drama. You're telling the truth. There's a difference." I clicked. Sent. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, supportive replies trickled in. Rachel. "I always knew you were treated differently. Proud of you for speaking up." My uncle from Houston. "I should have said something years ago. I'm sorry for staying quiet." But there was silence, too, from others who didn't want to get involved. And then there were the calls. My parents rang first. I let it go to voicemail. Mom's voice cracked through the speaker. "Sarah, how could you do this? You've humiliated us. Everyone's calling, asking questions. We told you not to spread lies, and now you've gone and broadcast them." Dad's voice followed, lower, seething. "You've made this family a circus. If people pull away from Emily's wedding, that's on you. Don't think you're innocent." Daniel deleted the message before I could replay it, his jaw clenched. "You don't need to keep hearing that." Later that week, my cousin Mark invited me to a barbecue in Dallas. At first, I hesitated. Did I really want to walk into a den of whispers? But something inside me wanted to face it, to see, with my own eyes, whether the truth held. So Daniel and I drove the 3 hours north. The moment we arrived, I felt it, the shift in air. People eyed me differently, not with suspicion, but with a kind of hushed respect. Conversations paused when I walked by, but not out of scorn. It was as if my story had finally been given space. Over paper plates of brisket and coleslaw, my uncle pulled me aside. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I saw how your mom fussed over Emily when you graduated, and how they barely clapped for you. I stayed out of it, thinking it wasn't my place. But it was wrong. You deserved better." His words cracked something in me. Years of doubting my own memories, of wondering if I was imagining the favoritism, validated by someone who had seen it all along. Of course, not everyone stayed silent. My mother cornered me before I left. She had shown up at the barbecue, face tight, smile plastered on like a mask. "Why are you doing this to us?" she hissed in a low voice near the drink cooler. "You've always wanted attention, and now you're getting it by tearing us down. People are canceling on Emily's engagement party because of you." I held her gaze, my voice steady. "People are canceling because of the truth. Maybe you should ask yourself why the truth makes you look so bad." Her face flushed. For the first time, she had no immediate comeback. She turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering about ungrateful children. Daniel appeared at my side, sliding an arm around me. That was brave. I shook my head. It was necessary. Back in Austin that night, sitting on our porch again, I realized something. For years, my parents had controlled the story. They'd written me as the jealous sister, the unstable daughter, the afterthought, and I had lived in that script, playing the role they gave me. But now the script had cracked. I wasn't rewriting history. I was just refusing to keep acting in theirs. The truth had finally found its way into the open, and once sunlight touches something, it doesn't go back into the dark. The barbecue in Dallas had left a strange aftertaste, part relief, part exhaustion. For the first time, relatives had said out loud what I'd always known. That I wasn't crazy, that favoritism had been woven into my life since childhood. Truth had broken through. But when Daniel and I drove back down I-35 to Austin that Sunday night, headlights sweeping over the blacktop, I knew validation wasn't the same as healing. The following week, Austin wore its usual contradictions: blue skies that looked like forever, traffic that felt like purgatory, and live music spilling from bars on a random Tuesday. I found myself sitting in our small backyard, laptop closed, ring of condensation under my iced coffee, just staring at the cedar fence. For years, every choice I'd made, college, career, even the city I lived in, had been shaped by one quiet hope, that maybe one day my parents would look at me and finally see someone worth loving. But the Dallas trip proved it beyond doubt. They couldn't, and they wouldn't. That night, I told Daniel what had been circling my chest like a hawk all day. "I keep waiting for them to apologize," I admitted. "And I think I finally get it. They never will. Not because they can't, but because it would crack the perfect image they've built, and their image means more than me." Daniel slid his chair closer, pressing his hand over mine. "Then maybe it's time you stop waiting. You don't need their permission to be whole." His words sank deep, like stones settling at the bottom of a river. The next morning, I opened my phone and scrolled to the contact labeled Mom and Dad. My thumb hovered. For a heartbeat, I almost called, almost begged the way I had 100 times before. Instead, I hit Edit Contact. My chest tightened as I erased the number, then the name. When the entry vanished, a silence spread in my chest. A silence not of loss, but of space. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway. "You okay?" I nodded, tears rising anyway. "It feels like cutting a cord that was strangling me. It hurts, but I can breathe." Healing didn't come as a single sweeping moment. It came in small, stubborn steps. Maya, my friend from work, invited me to join a weekend volunteer project teaching girls in East Austin how to code. At first, I hesitated. I was so used to pouring my energy into survival, not giving. But something in me whispered go. That Saturday, I stood in a rec center classroom, watching a shy 12-year-old named Alondra debug her first Hello World program. Her face lit up when the console finally returned the right line of text. "See?" I grinned. "The computer's speaking your language now." She laughed, clapping her hands together. And in her joy, I recognized something I had missed for years. The power of being seen, not for who you're compared against, but for what you create with your own two hands. When I drove home that evening, Austin's skyline glowed under the setting sun. For once, I didn't think about Emily, or my parents. I thought about Alondra's grin, and the possibility that maybe my worth had never been theirs to measure. One night, weeks later, Daniel found me sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes I hadn't touched in years. Childhood report cards, old medals, faded photos where Emily always stood center, and I blurred at the edge. "What are you doing?" he asked gently. "Deciding what I want to carry forward," I said, "and what I'm done dragging behind me." Piece by piece, I sorted. The math trophy from 5th grade, kept. A torn flyer from Emily's modeling debut, trashed. The certificate from my senior science fair, kept. A birthday card signed only "Love Mom and Dad," with Emily's achievements scrawled in the margins, trashed. It was messy, it was emotional, but by the time I sealed a box for donation, my chest felt lighter, like I'd finally chosen my own history. Healing also came in laughter. Daniel and I hosted friends for a game night, the living room crammed with takeout containers, and the raucous sound of people who didn't need me to prove my value. At one point, Maya leaned over and whispered, "Look around. This is your family too." I followed her gaze, faces glowing under string lights, voices warm with belonging, and she was right. Family wasn't defined by blood or tradition. It was defined by who showed up, who stayed, who celebrated you not for comparison but for connection. The real turning point came on a quiet Sunday morning. I sat on the porch with coffee, cicadas humming, when Daniel joined me. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a small package wrapped in craft paper. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a leather notebook, the kind with thick blank pages. On the first page, in his neat handwriting, were the words, "This is for your story. Write it the way it should be told." My throat closed. All my life, my parents had controlled the narrative, who I was, what I lacked, why I never measured up. But this book was empty, waiting. My story could be mine now. I looked up at Daniel, tears spilling. "You know what this feels like?" He tilted his head. "Freedom?" "Exactly," I whispered. That night, before bed, I wrote my first entry. I am not Emily's shadow. I am Sarah Mitchell, a wife, an engineer, a friend, a woman who deserves to be seen. Today, I choose to heal. The words weren't perfect, but they were mine. And as I closed the notebook, I realized healing wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about building a life that could hold it without collapsing. Healing had come in pieces, letters torn, numbers deleted, truths spoken. But the question remained, what comes next? I had spent so long reacting to my parents and Emily, I wasn't sure how to live without their shadow. One Saturday in late spring, Daniel and I opened our home for a dinner party. It wasn't fancy. Folding chairs borrowed from neighbors, string lights zigzagged across our backyard, food spread potluck style on the table. But as the evening unfolded, I realized this wasn't just a gathering. It was a declaration. Maya showed up with a tray of enchiladas, still steaming. My cousin Rachel drove down from Dallas with her husband, bringing a bottle of wine. Daniel's sister hauled in a Bluetooth speaker and soon had half the group dancing barefoot in the grass. Laughter rose into the warm Austin air, clinking against the sound of cicadas. At one point, I stepped back, watching. Friends huddled over board games. Janet, my mother-in-law, poured lemonade for the kids. Daniel, in his wrinkled t-shirt, leaned against the fence, smiling at me with that quiet certainty that had steadied me 100 times before. And I thought, this is family. Not the one I was given. The one I chose. Halfway through the night, Rachel pulled me aside. "You know," she said softly, "Aunt Karen's been calling around again. She's panicking. People are questioning her version of things more than ever." I nodded, the information no longer sharp, just expected. Let her panic. The truth doesn't need my permission to exist anymore. Rachel squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. For speaking up. For not letting it swallow you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. For a long time, I thought surviving was the same as living. But tonight, this feels different. Later, when the dancing slowed and the night grew cooler, we gathered around a fire pit. Someone handed me a marshmallow on a stick. I roasted it until it blazed, then blew the flame out, watching the ember glow faint orange before fading. It felt symbolic, the way something could burn, then cool, then still be sweet in the end. Daniel slid his arm around me. "You okay?" I looked at him, at the circle of faces around the fire, at the warmth that wasn't performative or conditional but real. "Yeah," I said. "For the first time, I think I am." In the weeks that followed, I built new routines: weekend coding classes with the girls in East Austin, book clubs with Maya and her friends, family dinners with the Carters. Slowly, the empty spaces my parents had left were filled, not replaced, but transformed. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Instead, I let the silence remain theirs, not mine. Looking back, I see the pattern clearly. A childhood spent chasing applause that never came, a wedding defined by 2 empty chairs, years of believing the story my parents told about me, that I was jealous, unstable, less. But here's what I've learned. Your worth is not measured by the people who fail to see it. It's measured by the people who show up, who stay, who clap when you win and hold you when you break. Blood doesn't guarantee love and absence doesn't define you. I used to think healing meant my parents would change. It doesn't. Healing means I change, choosing not to carry what was never mine, choosing to write my own story instead of acting in theirs. Family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes family is friends who bring enchiladas, co-workers who see your light, a partner who tells you you're enough even when you can't believe it yourself. If you're listening to this, maybe you've felt like a shadow too. I promise, you don't have to stay there. You can step into your own light. So if this story touched you, hit like, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Let's remind each other, we all deserve to be seen.